Zoe Harper lay sprawled across the cold marble floor of Chicago's most exclusive hotel ballroom, her $3,000 black evening gown now soaked in deep red wine. The liquid spread around her like spilled blood, staining the pristine white marble that reflected the golden glow of crystal chandeliers above. "Security! Get this trash out of my hotel before she steals something." The voice belonged to Victoria Ashford, a woman whose diamond necklace cost more than most people's homes. She stood over Zoe like a conqueror over the defeated, her perfectly manicured finger pointing down in disgust. Around them, Chicago's wealthiest elite had formed a cruel circle, their phones held high like weapons, capturing every second of what they believed was justified punishment. The flashes from dozens of cameras turned the grand ballroom into a nightmare of strobing lights. Cruel laughter echoed off the marble walls as grown adults recorded a young woman's humiliation like it was evening entertainment. Some were already posting to social media, adding hashtags that would make this moment live forever in the digital world. But as Zoe pushed herself up from the floor, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light even in her degraded state, something buzzed against the marble. Her phone. The screen lit up with a message that would change everything. Ashford acquisition approved, $5.2 billion ready for transfer. Awaiting signature, Harper legal. The irony was so perfect it felt like fiction, except this was real. The very woman they were calling trash, the person they wanted removed like garbage, held their entire future in her hands. And they had no idea what was coming. You know that feeling when you see someone being treated unfairly and your heart starts racing? When every fiber of your being wants to step in and defend them. That's exactly what you should be feeling right now. Because if you believe that how we treat others when we think they can't hurt us reveals who we really are, then you understand why this story matters. What Zoe Harper was about to do would teach this family the most expensive lesson about respect they would ever learn. And if you're someone who believes that actions have consequences, that dignity matters more than dollars, then you're going to want to see every second of what happens next. Because sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door. Sometimes it kicks it down. 3 months earlier, the California sun blazed down on Stanford University as thousands of graduates tossed their caps into the cloudless sky. Among them was Zoe Harper, clutching her MBA diploma like it was made of gold. For her, it represented something more valuable than the degree itself. It was proof that she could succeed on her own merit. Her father, Richard Harper, stood in the crowd of proud parents, his eyes focused entirely on his daughter. At 54, he commanded boardrooms across 3 continents, but watching Zoe graduate was the proudest moment of his life. His tech empire, Harper Industries, was worth $8.2 billion, but his greatest investment had always been in his daughter's future. As they walked back to his Tesla, the conversation that would change everything began. "Dad, I got an invitation to the Ashford charity gala next week," Zoe said, sliding the gold-embossed card from her purse. "It could be perfect for networking. Real connections, not just people trying to get close because of our name." Richard's face shifted slightly. He knew that name, Ashford. His legal team had been working on something involving their hotels for months. But he also knew his daughter's fierce independence. "Zoe, are you sure about going alone? These high society events can be complicated." "That's exactly why I'm going as Zoe Stevens," she replied, using her mother's maiden name with determined pride. "I want people to judge my ideas, not my trust fund. This MBA means nothing if I can't make it on my own." Richard felt that familiar mix of pride and concern that every parent knows. His daughter's strength was also her weakness. "Sweetheart, there's nothing wrong with using the advantages you were born with. Your mother would have wanted dash. Mom would have wanted me to earn respect, not inherit it," Zoe interrupted, her voice soft but firm. "I love you, Dad, but I need to know that my success is mine." Richard pulled into their driveway and turned to study his daughter's face. She had her mother's determination and his business instincts, but she also had something he'd lost years ago, the belief that the world was fair. "Just promise me you'll call if you need anything. Anything at all." "I promise," Zoe laughed, kissing his cheek. "But I won't need to. What's the worst that could happen at a charity gala?" Richard smiled, but something nagged at him. "Actually, funny you mention hotels. I've been working on something big in that industry. Can't say much yet, but it might be the largest acquisition Harper Industries has ever made." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Wow, that sounds huge. Anyone I'd know?" "Probably not. Old Chicago money, very traditional family. The kind of people who—" Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say they might not be as progressive as we'd hope." Neither of them realized they were talking about the same event. Neither understood that in 3 months, their separate worlds would collide in the most devastating way possible. That night, Zoe sat in her apartment, carefully removing every business card that said Harper from her wallet. She replaced them with fresh ones reading, "Zoe Stevens, business consultant." To her, each card represented a chance to prove herself. She had no idea she was throwing away the only shield that could protect her from what was coming. Meanwhile, Richard was in his home office, reviewing the final details of the Ashford acquisition. The family was desperate, drowning in debt despite their public facade. His company would save them, but he'd insisted on complete discretion. He'd never even seen a photo of the Ashford family. The irony was perfect and terrible. A father who'd built an empire to protect his daughter was about to hand $5 billion to the very people who would try to destroy her. You know that feeling when you watch someone make a choice that you know will hurt them, but they can't see it coming? When you want to reach through the screen and shake them, tell them to stop, to think, to just stay home. That's what makes this so heartbreaking. Zoe's independence, the very quality that made her admirable, was about to become the weapon used against her. If you've ever tried to prove yourself without help, if you understand that burning need to succeed on your own terms, then you know why this story will break your heart before it mends it. Because sometimes the people we're trying to prove ourselves to are the last ones who deserve our effort. And sometimes, the parent who wants to protect us the most ends up being the one who can't. The Ashford Grand Hotel stood like a monument to old Chicago money, its marble columns reaching toward a sky that seemed to bow in deference. Tonight, the ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers that had witnessed a century of power plays, but if you looked closely, you'd notice some of the bulbs flickering, a small sign of the rot hiding beneath the surface. Victoria Ashford moved through the crowd like a queen surveying her kingdom, her 52-year-old frame draped in a designer gown that cost more than most people's cars. Every gesture was calculated, every smile a weapon of social warfare. She had spent 3 decades perfecting the art of making people feel small while appearing gracious, and tonight she needed that skill more than ever. Her husband Theodore nursed his 3rd whiskey in an hour, his 55-year-old hands trembling slightly as he checked his phone for the 100th time. The mystery buyer was supposed to call tonight. Harper Industries. The name meant salvation, but Theodore had never met Richard Harper, never seen his face. All he knew was that this stranger held the key to saving everything they'd built over 4 generations. "Daddy, you're being so weird tonight," Blair Ashford complained, adjusting her Instagram ring light for another story. At 24, she lived in a bubble of followers and luxury, completely unaware that her lifestyle was funded by maxed-out credit lines and her father's increasingly desperate loans. Her phone case was studded with real diamonds, the last gift before the accountant started recommending cost-cutting measures. Preston Ashford, 26 and every inch the privileged heir, laughed at something his trust fund friends were saying. His laughter had a cruel edge that made waiters flinch and made other guests uncomfortable, but Preston had never learned to read a room. He'd never had to. His trust fund had always provided a cushion between him and consequences, though he didn't know that fund was now worth exactly $0. The charity gala was their masterpiece of deception. 500 of Chicago's elite had paid $1,000 plates to support disadvantaged youth, but the real goal was much simpler: maintain the illusion of wealth long enough to close the Harper deal. Every crystal glass, every orchid centerpiece, every smile was borrowed against a future they weren't sure they'd have. Victoria's phone buzzed. Her event coordinator texted, "Catering payment declined. Using backup card." Victoria's smile never wavered as she typed back, "Handle it quietly." She slipped the phone into her purse and continued her rounds, complimenting wives on their jewelry while mentally calculating which pieces she'd have to sell first. "Mrs. Ashford, the flowers are absolutely gorgeous," gushed a society matron who'd been trying to gain entry to their inner circle for years. "Thank you, darling. We believe in doing things properly," Victoria replied, her voice dripping with the kind of warmth that somehow made people feel cold. What she didn't mention was that the flowers would be repossessed tomorrow if the Harper deal didn't close. Theodore pulled his son aside near the bar. "Preston, I need you and Blair to be on your best behavior tonight. We're expecting important business news." "What kind of business news?" Preston asked, refilling his champagne glass without waiting for the server. "The kind that keeps us living like this instead of—" Theodore's voice trailed off. He couldn't bring himself to say the words. "Just be polite. To everyone." Preston rolled his eyes. "Dad, relax. When have I ever been anything but charming?" If Theodore had answered honestly, it would have been a very short conversation. Across the room, Blair was explaining to her followers how charity work was, so important for building your personal brand. She had no idea that her father had borrowed against her trust fund to pay for this very event, or that her credit cards would be canceled by Monday if Harper Industries said no. The beautiful irony was that salvation was walking through their front doors at that very moment. But they'd trained themselves so well to see enemies instead of allies, to judge worth by appearance instead of substance, that they were about to destroy the very miracle they'd been praying for. We all know families like this, people who think money makes them better than everyone else, who've never learned that respect can't be purchased and dignity can't be inherited. If you believe that character matters more than bank accounts, that how we treat people when we think they can't help us reveals who we really are, then you understand why this story needs to be shared. Because what was about to happen would prove that sometimes the people who think they're untouchable are actually hanging by the thinnest thread. And sometimes, that thread is about to be cut by the very person they least expect. The Harper Industries call was coming. But first, they had to meet Harper's daughter. And they had no idea what they were about to do to her. At 7:37 p.m., Zoe Harper stepped out of her Uber at the Ashford Grand Hotel, looking every inch the successful Stanford MBA she was. Her black evening gown hugged her curves perfectly, her diamond earrings caught the light from the hotel's golden facade, and her confidence radiated from every step. She was Zoe Stevens tonight, ready to network her way into Chicago's business elite. The doorman held the entrance open with professional courtesy, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. The marble lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers, classical music drifted through the air, and well-dressed guests moved with the easy confidence of people who belonged. Zoe took a deep breath and stepped into what she believed would be the next chapter of her independent success story. She had no idea she was walking into a nightmare. The first crack in her perfect evening came at the coat check. The elderly attendant looked at Zoe's designer wrap, then back at Zoe herself, confusion creasing his features. "Miss, are you here for the catering staff meeting? That entrance is around back." Zoe smiled politely, used to these kinds of assumptions. Actually, I'm a guest. Zoe Stevens. She handed him her invitation, the gold embossing catching the light. The man's face flushed slightly as he took her coat. Oh, my apologies, Mississippi, enjoy your evening. Strike one. But Zoe had thick skin. She dealt with assumptions her whole life. The ballroom was magnificent, soaring ceilings, tables draped in ivory silk, centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's rent. Zoe moved through the crowd with practiced ease, introducing herself to potential business contacts, her Zoe Stevens business cards crisp and professional in her small clutch. But something was off. Conversations that started warmly turned cold when she mentioned her consulting firm. Business cards were accepted with increasingly forced smiles, and she noticed several people glancing at each other over her head, their expressions unreadable. 20 minutes in, she excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment to regroup. As she entered the elegant powder room with its marble counters and gold fixtures, she heard voices from the lounge area, familiar voices that made her freeze. I just don't understand why they let just anyone in these days, Victoria Ashford was saying to her circle of society friends. I mean, look at the guest list. It's supposed to be exclusive, but now we have, well, you know what I mean. Those people always find a way to get invitations, another woman replied with a knowing laugh. Probably someone's +1 trying to network their way up. Zoe's hand gripped the marble counter as Victoria continued. The worst part is they act like they belong here. Like they have anything in common with families who've built this city for generations. It's almost insulting. The bathroom stall door trembled slightly as Zoe fought back tears of rage and humiliation. These women were talking about her like she was an infection, a problem to be solved. She wanted to walk out there and tell them exactly who she was, whose daughter stood in their restroom listening to their poison. But she couldn't. That would mean admitting defeat, admitting that she needed Daddy's name to earn respect. So she stayed silent, let the words cut deep, and promised herself she'd prove them wrong through her actions. Back in the ballroom, things got worse. She approached a group of tech executives, thinking her Stanford MBA and business acumen would open doors. Instead, she was met with polite but increasingly hostile dismissal. Zoe Stevens, consulting, one man repeated, looking at her business card like it was contaminated. What exactly makes you think you're qualified to consult with companies like ours? My MBA from Stanford, 3 years of strategic analysis experience, and Stanford has really lowered their standards, haven't they? The man's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. He handed her card back. I think you'd be more comfortable at a different kind of event. Her business card fluttered to the marble floor like a broken dream. The humiliation continued in waves. A woman questioned how she'd gotten an invitation. A man suggested she might be more comfortable with her own kind. Each interaction stripped away another layer of her dignity, but Zoe held her head high, her voice steady, her smile unwavering even as her heart broke a little more. Then Preston Ashford noticed her. Well, what do we have here? His voice carried that particular brand of cruelty that comes from never facing consequences. You look a little lost, sweetheart. Are you sure you're in the right place? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Zoe replied, her voice calm despite the storm building inside her chest. Really? Because I'm looking at the guest list, and I don't see any Stevens family on here. Preston's friends laughed at his obvious emphasis on her last name. Maybe there was some kind of mistake? The circle around them grew larger. Other guests sensed drama and moved closer, phones subtly positioned to record whatever happened next. Zoe felt the weight of their stares, the heat of their judgment, the crushing pressure of having to prove her worth to people who had already decided she was worthless. "My invitation is perfectly legitimate," she said, maintaining her composure even as her internal voice screamed at her to tell them the truth, to reveal who she really was and watch their faces crumble with realization. But that would mean losing. That would mean admitting that without her father's name, she was exactly what they thought she was: nothing. If you've ever wanted to defend someone who couldn't defend themselves, this next part will make your blood boil. Because what you're watching isn't just cruelty, it's the systematic destruction of a human being's dignity by people who think their money makes them gods. Share this story, because silence in the face of injustice makes us all complicit in the cruelty. Zoe Harper was about to learn that sometimes maintaining your principles costs more than you ever imagined paying. And the Ashford family was about to learn that the person they were destroying had the power to destroy them right back. They just hadn't pushed her far enough yet. The moment that would change everything started with Blair Ashford's perfectly manicured fingernails wrapped around a crystal wine glass filled with deep red Bordeaux. She'd been watching Zoe navigate the hostile crowd for the past hour, and something about the young woman's quiet dignity in the face of cruelty had triggered Blair's worst instincts. Maybe it was jealousy. Even humiliated and rejected, Zoe carried herself with a grace that Blair's money couldn't buy. Maybe it was boredom. Rich girls with empty hearts often find entertainment in others' pain. Or maybe it was simply the pack mentality that turns civilized people into monsters when they smell blood in the water. Whatever the reason, Blair made a choice that would haunt her family for generations. "Oh my God, Preston, you have to get this on video," Blair whispered to her brother, positioning herself near the marble steps that led to the main dining area. "Trust me, this is going to be hilarious." Preston, already 3 champagne glasses deep and hungry for content that would get likes on his social media, pulled out his phone and started recording. "What are you doing, B? Just watch and learn, little brother." Zoe was walking back from another failed networking attempt, her head held high despite the growing hostility she felt from every direction. She moved with the careful grace of someone who knew all eyes were on her, waiting for her to stumble, to give them a reason to justify their cruelty. Blair timed it perfectly. As Zoe approached the marble steps, Blair stepped directly into her path while pretending to adjust her diamond bracelet. The collision was inevitable. Blair's full wine glass tilted, then flew, sending deep red Bordeaux arcing through the air like liquid violence. The wine hit Zoe's black dress with the force of a slap, the cold liquid shocking her system as it soaked through the expensive fabric. But Blair wasn't done. As Zoe stumbled backward from the impact, Blair extended her foot just enough to catch Zoe's heel. Time slowed as Zoe fell. The marble floor rushed up to meet her with unforgiving hardness. Her knees hit first, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent ballroom like a gunshot. Her hands scraped against the polished stone as she tried to break her fall, and her diamond earrings scattered across the floor like fallen stars, their sparkle a cruel contrast to her position of defeat. But it was the wine that created the visual that would live forever in infamy. Deep red liquid spread across the pristine white marble like spilled blood, creating a crimson lake around Zoe's fallen form. The stain seemed to grow with malicious intent, seeping into every crack and crevice, impossible to clean, impossible to forget. 4-3 heartbeats, the ballroom was silent. Then Victoria Ashford's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Look what you've done." Victoria's outrage was theatrical, perfectly pitched for maximum public impact. "You've ruined everything. Security! Security!" The crowd erupted. What had been whispered cruelty became open mockery as Chicago's elite pulled out their phones like weapons. Camera flashes began strobing, turning the elegant ballroom into a nightmare of blinding light and digital capture. Every angle was documented, every moment of humiliation preserved for posterity. "Oh my God, did you see that?" Someone laughed, their phone held high to get the perfect shot of Zoe on her knees in the spreading wine. She totally just face-planted. This is going straight to my story. Someone get this on TikTok, this is gold. Preston stepped closer, his phone capturing everything in high definition as he provided live commentary like a sports announcer calling a game. And down she goes, ladies and gentlemen. I guess some people just can't handle their wine. Make sure you're following me for more exclusive content from Chicago's most exclusive events. The hotel staff stood frozen, caught between their training to help guests and their fear of offending the Ashford family. Security guards looked uncertainly between their bosses and the woman on the floor, unsure which directive to follow first. Zoe pushed herself up on trembling arms, wine dripping from her hair, her dress clinging to her skin like a shroud. Her scraped knees burned against the cold marble, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of having her humiliation broadcast to hundreds of strangers. But she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. Instead, she began the careful process of gathering her scattered belongings with a dignity that should have shamed every person recording her. That's when her phone buzzed. The sound cut through the laughter and commentary like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. Zoe's phone had skittered across the marble when she fell, and now it lay just inches from her outstretched hand, its screen illuminated with an incoming message. The text was from Harper Industries' legal department. Ashford acquisition approved, $5.2 billion ready for transfer. Awaiting signature from Richard Harper. Congratulations on the successful negotiation, Miss Harper. Zoe stared at the screen, wine still dripping from her hair onto the marble floor. In that moment, the universe's sense of irony revealed itself in all its terrible glory. The people laughing at her, recording her humiliation, calling her trash, they were about to become her father's employees. The family treating her like garbage was literally begging her father for the money that would save their crumbling empire. And they had no idea who they had just destroyed. The laughter continued around her. Phones kept recording. Victoria kept ranting about property damage and calling security. Preston kept providing commentary for his followers. Blair stood back, admiring her handiwork with satisfied cruelty. None of them noticed the change in Zoe's expression as she read the message. None of them saw the moment when humiliation transformed into something far more dangerous. None of them realized that the young woman they had just turned into a viral sensation held the power to end their entire world with a single phone call. If this makes you sick, you're not alone. Every person recording this thinks they're just having fun, but they're about to become part of the most expensive viral video in history. What they don't understand is that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences arrive with the force of a $5 billion hurricane. Because Zoe Harper was about to stand up from that wine-stained marble floor and make a phone call that would teach the Ashford family the most expensive lesson about human dignity ever recorded. The only question was whether they'd realize what was happening before it was too late to stop it. Spoiler alert, they wouldn't. Zoe Harper knelt on the cold marble floor, wine still dripping from her hair, surrounded by the cruel laughter of Chicago's elite. But as she stared at the text message glowing on her phone screen, something fundamental shifted inside her chest. The words, Ashford acquisition approved, $5.2 billion ready for transfer, weren't just business jargon anymore. They were the key to everything. These people, the ones recording her humiliation, calling her trash, treating her like she was nothing, they needed her father's money to survive. They were literally begging Richard Harper for salvation while destroying his daughter for sport. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted by the universe itself. Zoe slowly pushed herself up from the marble floor, wine-stained and scraped but no longer broken. The crowd continued their mockery, phones still recording, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. Victoria Ashford was still ranting about property damage. Preston was still narrating for his Instagram followers. Blair was still smirking with satisfaction. None of them noticed when Zoe picked up her phone and scrolled to her father's contact. She didn't hesitate. She didn't consider the consequences. She didn't think about maintaining her independence or proving herself without Daddy's help. All of that seemed trivial now compared to the lesson these people needed to learn. She hit call and immediately switched to speakerphone. The ballroom's acoustics were perfect, designed to carry voices to every corner during speeches and toasts. Now they would carry the sound of an empire crumbling. Richard Harper's voice filled the silence like thunder rolling across a clear sky. "Zoe, sweetheart, it's late. Is everything okay?" Every conversation in the ballroom stopped. Every cruel laugh died mid-breath. Every phone continued recording, but now the energy had shifted completely. Something was happening that no one understood, but everyone could feel the change in the air. "Hi, Daddy," Zoe said, her voice steady despite the wine dripping from her chin. She stayed on her knees on the marble floor, surrounded by the spreading red stain, but somehow her position no longer looked like defeat. "I'm at a charity gala right now, and I need to ask you something." "Of course, baby. What do you need?" Theodore Ashford's face had gone pale. The name Richard Harper was echoing in his wine-clouded brain, trying to connect to something important. His phone was buzzing with notifications, probably the Harper Industries legal team trying to finalize the deal that would save his family's legacy. "Daddy, what was that hotel deal you mentioned? The big acquisition Harper Industries was working on." Richard's voice carried easily across the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. "The Ashford Hotel's deal? $5.2 billion. Why do you ask? We're supposed to finalize everything tonight." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a diamond earring drop. Victoria Ashford's mouth fell open. Her calculating eyes, which had looked at Zoe with such disdain, now stared in growing horror as the pieces clicked into place. The young woman she'd been calling trash, the person she'd wanted thrown out like garbage, was Richard Harper's daughter. Richard Harper, the billionaire who literally held their financial future in his hands. Theodore's whiskey glass slipped from his suddenly numb fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound like breaking dreams. The liquid mixed with the spilled wine, creating a puddle that reflected the chandeliers above like a distorted mirror of their collapsing world. "Daddy," Zoe continued, her voice still calm, still steady, still speaking into a ballroom so quiet that her words carried to every corner, every phone, every witness to what came next. "I need you to cancel the Ashford deal. All of it." The gasp that went up from the crowd was audible. Phones that had been recording Zoe's humiliation were now capturing the most expensive revenge in business history. "Cancel it." Richard's voice carried just a hint of steel now. "Zoe, what happened? Are you hurt? Are you safe?" "I'm fine, Daddy. But the Ashford family just taught me something important about how they treat people they think are beneath them. And I think you should know what kind of people you're about to go into business with." Preston's phone was shaking in his hands, still recording, but now his face was white with terror instead of flushed with cruel pleasure. His Instagram story was about to become evidence of the most expensive bullying incident in history. Blair had stopped smiling. The wineglass she'd used as a weapon hung forgotten in her manicured grip as she stared at Zoe with dawning comprehension. She'd destroyed her own family for a few minutes of mean girl entertainment. "Consider it done, sweetheart." Richard Harper's voice boomed across the ballroom with the finality of a judge's gavel. "No one treats my daughter like that. The deal is cancelled. All of it." Victoria Ashford made a sound like a wounded animal. "No, No, no. This can't be happening. This is impossible. But it was happening. In real time. With hundreds of witnesses and dozens of phone cameras recording every second. Theodore finally found his voice. Mr. Harper, sir, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea. You had no idea that the young woman you were humiliating was a human being deserving of basic respect? Richard's voice carried the kind of cold fury that had built empires and destroyed competitors. You're right. That's exactly the problem. Zoe slowly stood up from the marble floor, wine still staining her dress, but now she looked like a queen rising from her throne. The people who had been laughing at her moments before were now staring in absolute horror as they realized they had just participated in their own destruction. The legal team will be in touch about canceling all existing agreements, Richard continued, his voice echoing off the marble walls like a death sentence. Loans, partnerships, supplier contracts, everything. This conversation is over. Daddy, wait, Zoe said, looking directly at Victoria Ashford's terrified face. Make sure the security footage from tonight gets preserved. I think people deserve to see how the Ashford family treats their guests. The click of Richard Harper hanging up was the loudest sound in the silent ballroom. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the gentle tinkling of crystal chandeliers and the soft buzz of phones still recording the aftermath of a $5 billion phone call. Then Theodore Ashford collapsed. Not physically, though he looked like he might, but emotionally, completely, utterly. 4 generations of family legacy had just been destroyed by his own cruelty and his children's entertainment. The empire his great-grandfather had built was crumbling because they couldn't treat one young woman with basic human dignity. This is what happens when you underestimate someone based on how they look. When you think your money makes you better than other people. When you forget that every person you meet might be fighting battles you can't see or carrying power you can't imagine. If you believe in treating everyone with dignity regardless of their appearance, share this story with someone who needs to remember that respect costs nothing but can save everything. Because Zoe Harper had just proven that sometimes the person you're stepping on is actually standing on much higher ground than you realized. And sometimes, that person has the power to make you fall further than you ever thought possible. The Ashford family was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way imaginable. The silence that followed Richard Harper's final words lasted exactly 7 seconds. Then Theodore Ashford's phone began to ring. The ringtone echoed across the marble floors like a funeral bell, and Theodore's trembling hands could barely hold the device steady as he saw the caller ID, Harper Industries Legal Department. He answered with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for driftwood. Hello. Please. There's been a misunderstanding. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and utterly merciless. Mr. Ashford, this is Jennifer Chen from Harper Industries Legal. We're calling to inform you that all pending agreements between Harper Industries and Ashford Hotels are hereby terminated, effective immediately. Theodore's legs gave out. He sank into the nearest chair as the lawyer's words continued to flow like acid through the phone's speaker, loud enough for nearby guests to hear every devastating detail. The $5.2 billion acquisition is canceled. The $800 million loan facility is being called in immediately. All supplier contracts that were contingent on the Harper deal are void. The partnership agreements for the charity foundation are terminated. Each sentence was another nail in the Ashford family coffin, and everyone in the ballroom could see Theodore dying a little more with every word. Victoria Ashford pushed through the crowd toward Zoe, her composed mask finally cracking to reveal the desperation underneath. Please, you have to understand, this was all a terrible mistake. We didn't know who you were. That's exactly the problem, Zoe replied, still standing in the puddle of spilled wine, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned ballroom. "You knew exactly who I was. I was a human being deserving of basic respect. That should have been enough." Victoria's face crumpled as the full weight of what they'd lost hit her. "But our family has been part of Chicago society for 4 generations. We employ thousands of people. This hotel, these jobs, the charity work. Should have thought about that before you decided entertainment was more important than humanity." Meanwhile, Preston Ashford was having a very different kind of breakdown. His phone was still recording, but now instead of cruel commentary, he was screaming into the camera with raw panic. "This is bull. Some entitled brat thinks she can destroy our family just because we had a little fun? This is America. We have rights. We have..." His racist rant continued for another 30 seconds before Blair grabbed his phone and tried to end the live stream, but it was too late. Thousands of viewers had already screen-recorded his meltdown, and the clip was spreading across social media faster than spilled wine across marble. Blair's own phone was buzzing constantly as her followers watched her Instagram stories from the evening. The girl who had orchestrated Zoe's humiliation was now frantically trying to delete videos, but the internet never forgets. Screenshots were already circulating with captions like, "How to destroy your family's billion-dollar empire in 30 seconds." Around the ballroom, other guests were pulling out their phones not to record more cruelty, but to check stock prices. Ashford Hotel's share price was visible in real time on their trading apps, and the numbers were falling like stones dropped from a great height. "Down 18%, someone whispered. 26% now, another voice added. 43%. Oh my God, it's in freefall." The hotel staff, who had stood frozen during Zoe's humiliation, were now choosing sides with the clarity that comes from seeing power shift in real time. The general manager approached Zoe with the kind of respectful deference they should have shown from the beginning. "Miss Harper, please accept my sincere apologies for what happened here tonight. If there's anything we can do, you can make sure every employee who treated me with kindness tonight is protected when ownership changes," Zoe replied, her voice carrying the authority that came with being Richard Harper's daughter. "Because this hotel will definitely be changing hands." Media calls started flooding in within minutes. Business reporters, gossip columnists, social media influencers, everyone wanted to know about the viral video of Chicago's youngest billionaire heiress destroying an old money family with a single phone call. The story had everything: wealth, revenge, social media, and the kind of perfect justice that people craved in an unfair world. Theodore was still on the phone with Harper Industries Legal, begging for mercy that wasn't coming. "Please, surely we can work something out. We have assets, we can negotiate terms." "Mr. Ashford, your assets are collateral for loans that are now in default. Our client was very clear. All agreements are terminated. Good evening." The line went dead. Victoria tried one last desperate approach, dropping to her knees in the spilled wine beside Zoe. "I'll apologize publicly. I'll make donations to any charity you choose. Please, just give us a chance to make this right." Zoe looked down at the woman who had called her trash an hour earlier, now kneeling in the same spot where Zoe had been humiliated. "Mrs. Ashford, do you know how many chances you had tonight to treat me with basic human decency? Every interaction was a choice. Every cruel word was a decision. Every moment you could have shown character, you chose cruelty instead." The ballroom had become a scene from a disaster movie, some people fleeing to avoid association with the Ashfords, others staying to witness the complete collapse of a Chicago dynasty. The charity gala had become a funeral for old money arrogance. 1 year later, the transformation was complete. Zoe Harper's consulting firm occupied 3 floors of a downtown Chicago high-rise, her client list reading like a Fortune 500 directory. She'd proven that her success was built on merit, not just money, though having both didn't hurt. Her TED Talk about dignity and respect had been viewed 12 million times. The former Ashford Grand Hotel had been acquired by Harper Industries for a fraction of its original value and transformed into a hospitality training center focused on respectful service and cultural sensitivity. The irony was sweet. The place where Zoe had been humiliated now taught others how to treat people with dignity. Victoria Ashford folded sweaters at a department store in suburban Chicago, her manicured nails now chipped from honest work. She'd learned humility the hard way, but she'd learned it. Customers who recognized her sometimes asked for selfies, but Victoria had developed the grace to decline politely while continuing her work. Theodore had found employment as a maintenance supervisor at a mid-tier hotel chain. The job was honest work, and he discovered that earning respect through competence felt better than demanding it through inheritance. His hands, once soft from privilege, now bore the calluses of purpose. Preston drove for a rideshare company in a beat-up Honda Civic, his racist rant from that night having made him unemployable in any professional setting. He remained bitter, unchanged, and alone, proof that some people never learn from their consequences. Blair had worked her way up from hotel maid to assistant manager, the only member of her family who had used the experience to genuinely transform herself. She deleted all her social media accounts and focused on building real relationships instead of virtual ones. The viral video from that night had become a business school case study in reputation management and corporate ethics. Students watched it to understand how quickly privilege without character could destroy generations of wealth. This family learned the hardest lesson in business. Your reputation is your most valuable asset, and it can disappear in a single phone call. Money can be rebuilt, connections can be re-established, but character? That's something you either have or you don't. If this story reminded you that how we treat others when we think they can't hurt us reveals who we really are, share it with someone who needs to remember that every person you meet deserves respect simply because they're human. Because sometimes the person you're looking down on is actually looking down on you from heights you can't even imagine. And sometimes, justice doesn't just knock on your door. Sometimes it burns your whole house down. 2 years after that wine-stained night at the Ashford Grand Hotel, Zoe Harper stood at the exact same podium where Victoria Ashford had once commanded Chicago's elite. But now, the ballroom buzzed with a different kind of energy, one filled with hope instead of hatred, opportunity instead of exclusion. The marble floors still gleamed under crystal chandeliers, but the guests were different. Young entrepreneurs from every background imaginable filled the elegant space, their eyes bright with possibility rather than privilege. This was the inaugural Harper Hospitality Leadership Summit, and Zoe was the keynote speaker. 2 years ago, I stood in this very room, Zoe began, her voice carrying clearly through the transformed space. But I wasn't standing at this podium. I was on my knees on that marble floor, covered in wine, while people recorded my humiliation for their entertainment. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Many of them had seen the viral video that had launched 1,000 conversations about dignity, respect, and the true cost of cruelty. That night taught me something valuable about power. Real power isn't about having money or connections or the right last name. Real power is how you choose to treat people when you think they can't help you, when you think they can't hurt you, when you think they don't matter. In the audience, a young Latino entrepreneur named Carlos raised his hand. He'd grown up cleaning offices in this very building, never dreaming he'd one day sit in its ballroom as a guest. Now he was launching a sustainable catering company with a Harper Industries microloan. Behind him sat Maya, a black MBA student whose scholarship from the Harper Foundation had made her education possible. She'd written her thesis on ethical leadership and corporate responsibility, using Zoe's story as a central case study. The transformation of the space itself told a story of redemption and purpose. Where charity auctions had once raised money for tax write-offs, the Harper Hospitality Center now provided real training for real jobs. Where exclusion had once been the rule, inclusion was now the mission. The scholarship fund had grown beyond anyone's expectations, fueled not just by Harper Industries resources but by donations from people who had seen the viral video and wanted to be part of the solution. Hundreds of students from underprivileged backgrounds now had access to hospitality management training, business education, and most importantly, the knowledge that their dreams mattered. But the most surprising transformation had happened to some members of the Ashford family themselves. Victoria Ashford sat in the back row, wearing a simple black dress instead of designer gowns, her hands folded quietly in her lap. She'd requested to attend after completing 2 years of community service and sensitivity training. The woman who had once called Zoe trash now volunteered at homeless shelters and had written a letter of apology that was published in the Chicago Tribune. Theodore had found peace in honest work, discovering that respect earned through competence felt infinitely better than respect demanded through inheritance. He'd remarried, a kind woman who loved him for who he had become, not who he used to be. Blair had transformed most dramatically of all. After losing everything, she'd rebuilt herself from the ground up, starting as a hotel housekeeper and working her way into management through genuine effort and changed character. She now managed a small boutique hotel with warmth and inclusivity that would have been impossible in her previous life. Only Preston remained unchanged, his bitterness a prison he'd built for himself. Some people, Zoe had learned, choose to remain victims of their own anger rather than students of their mistakes. The greatest revenge isn't destroying someone, Zoe continued from the podium. The greatest revenge is using your pain to prevent someone else's. It's taking the worst moment of your life and transforming it into the best thing that ever happened to someone else. The audience erupted in applause, but Zoe held up her hand for quiet. I want everyone in this room to remember something. You never know who you're talking to. That server bringing your coffee might be the future CEO of a Fortune 500 company. That janitor cleaning your office might be working 3 jobs to put their kids through college. That person you're tempted to dismiss might be the very person who holds your future in their hands. She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. Faces representing every ethnicity, every background, every dream that Chicago had to offer. So treat everyone like they matter. Because they do. Not because of what they can do for you, but because their humanity is worth your respect. That's not just good business, that's good life. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. As the event concluded and guests mingled in the transformed ballroom, Zoe thought about the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation, the pain, the moment when everything seemed lost, it had all led to this room full of hope and possibility. The viral video from that terrible night had indeed become a business school case study, but it had become something more important too. It had become a mirror that forced people to examine their own behavior, their own biases, their own capacity for cruelty or kindness. Zoe turned her worst moment into her greatest lesson, and in doing so, she proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is transform pain into purpose. If this story inspired you to look at how you treat the people around you, really look, then it's done its job. Because at the end of the day, we're all just human beings trying to make it through this world with our dignity intact. Share this story not because you have to, but because someone in your life needs to remember that every person they meet is fighting battles they can't see and carrying dreams they might not understand. Treat them like they matter because they do. You never know when the person you're dismissing today might be the person who changes your tomorrow. Sometimes the universe has a way of making sure that what goes around truly comes around. The question is, what are you putting out there?